day in the life of Joe is in celebration of the International Year of Older Persons. If you remember, 1999, the UN decided that that was the International Year of the Older Persons. The nice thing is, it didn't stop in 1999. So it's continuing to grow. But what I was looking for at the time, I was vice president of forums for the International Interior Design Association, and I was trying to find a topic that affected all aspects of life and all aspects of design. So if you think about the aging population, it affects residential, it affects corporate design, it affects hospitality, how people are serving people. Not only the healthcare environment, but every other kind of environment there is, including retail and other specialties. So what we did was we were brainstorming one day and we're like, you know, we got to come up with something here. Let's use the aging population. So I had attended the UN conference, came back with the idea, brought it up with everyone, and we're like, we almost need a spokesperson for this. So that's kind of how Joe was born. So Joe came out of a very tired day of meetings, and all of a sudden he became a guy without a face that I travel with a lot. I'll walk down the street, people will go, I've met designers and things, they'll go, Joe, well, you know what I mean. I got an email the other day, Dear Joe. So we know it's working. Along with celebrations and events in honor of seniors, Joe finds himself in great company. John Glenn at 70 shows the world what the elderly population contributes to society. Mr. Kim Dae-jung, at age 74, wins the Nobel Peace Prize for his work for democracy and human rights in South Korea, and specifically for peace and reconciliation with North Korea. Debbie Reynolds has become Marriott Senior Living's poster girl. If you get Provider Magazine, which I imagine most of you do, Marriott is using Debbie Reynolds as their poster child to promote seniors. So all of a sudden now being old is a great thing, instead of it being something that's demeaned or taken back from because it's not youthful enough. Guess who's racing at age 75? Paul Newman at Daytona. Hard to believe Paul Newman's 75, isn't it? Hasbro introducing G.I. Bob in honor of Bob Hope. And what is G.I. Bob? It's a doll. So perhaps an older G.I. Joe doll will be next. Joe loves to get his plugs in where he can. And Barbie turns 40. What will the new older Barbie look like? Joe calls her hula hoop Barbie, a woman of the new millennium. We always wonder when, pearls and the house coat becomes the standard dress of the day. Joe's profile. He's 62 years old. He's a care provider for his 89-year-old dad. He's been a widower for 6 years. Josephine is his significant other. Josephine is a widow and 65 years old. Josephine is a sailor, and Joe occasionally cruises with Josephine when she thinks she'll let him aboard. 2 children live out of state, and 1 lives nearby. 4 grandchildren live out of town, utilizes email to stay in touch. He's retired from the military as an officer. After his military career, studied to become a social worker. With his social work background, he became involved in the home health care business. Home health care led to providing adult daycare services. Eventually, Joe became an administrator for an adult daycare facility. Loves to travel and adventure. He's involved with elder hostel trips and outings. He's seeking downsized housing options because he's a very smart baby boomer planner. His best friend lives in a low-income senior housing development. Joe visits Mel 3 times a week. Visits a nursing home that cared for his deceased wife twice a month to see staff and residents. Studies new developments for therapies for dementia because of his social work background in the elderly. Realizes that the built environment affects quality of life. Exercises 3 times a week. He takes a Tai Chi class at the senior center. Other hobbies include fishing and hiking. He belongs to the Elvis Golden fan club. And obviously, Joe faces multi-role and multitask challenges. I think of this in similar to the world of designers and architects. If you come out of school as a social worker, as a clinician, we come out of school as an architect. Are we taught how to handle business? Not really. Do we know a lot about design? Somewhat. Do we know how it impacts other people? Not really. Joe's heritage. Joe's early years with his family when he first starts out, when he first begins his military career and his first VW Bug. Joe's mom and dad. We don't know exactly what happens, but at a certain age, plaids and stripes are absolutely the acceptable deal. You know, and it's a guy thing. Did you ever notice that? It's a guy thing. We don't know exactly what happens. I think you never throw away anything. The older you get, you never throw away anything. If it still fits, it's okay. Doesn't matter what color it is. Home health care for Dad. Now, as his experience and his career path also led Joe to the idea of home health care. Now, if we think about it, this is a neat option. That's the all-terrain vehicle. You get anywhere with that. This, it looks like a torture chamber out of the rack, you know, from medieval period of time. Design can do much better on this. This is where we're lacking in one respect, is that the manufacturers of product aren't necessarily talking to you guys, nor are they talking to the designers and the architects. I went to a facility the other day to look at a new table. It's an overbed table that actually goes around 360 degrees. And I said, so you tested that on carpet, you tested it and see how it rolled on VCT, oh no, do we need to do that? Hello, that's how you're using the product, of course you need to. So if you think about this, if you basically want the home environment, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing aging in place. How do we help them do that? How do we help people do that? This is a product, it's an Alzheimer's cabinet. And it's a product that we've been working on to work on stations of activity. How do you break down stations of activity for living so that people can actually use those different stations and what should be included in those? So we can design the right product so that you know that you're getting something that's actually a valuable asset for your demented residents. And I like to show this too. This is the Mini Kid House. This is a facility for cognitive frail in the South Bank of London. And Mini Kid was actually there on respite care while I was there. Now respite care for my grandmother was, in her terms, being incarcerated. In Mini Kid's terms, she loved it there because she actually got an extra cup of tea and a little bit more attention than she did at home. Now while I was visiting that facility, because they divided their dementia from cognitive frail, I went into the area and they said, come on in, you know, they're doing an activity, come on in. And this wild woman, you know, she had like bangles and the piercings and the hair color and all this stuff. She's the art lady. So she was like, come on in, you know. So I came in and I was watching them and they were making bowls and they were conversing and it was just a really neat environment. And she goes, John, you missed a corner there. He was working with the paper mache material. And I looked at him and I thought, well, that's a little harsh, you know, he's trying his best, you know. And she said, ever since he's been working with these different products, he can now feed himself again. So we look at occupational therapy from a whole new point of view. You're outside of your box looking at how do you get that to happen without it being painful and something that you have to do. You create it as part of their daily environment and daily activity. Hanging with Josephine, one of his favorite things to do. That Josephine, man, she's a wild chick. Joe's grandkids, they're really important to him, and I think they're important to most older people. I did find out, though, in one inner city facility that one woman had taken care of her kids' kids, and her kids' kids' kids, and she didn't want any more kids. So there is times in certain facilities where people may not want the intergenerational forced down their throat. So think about it from a vernacular, think about it from a cultural perspective, and ask. Joe's career. This is elder health, which some of you may be familiar with adult daycare services. My first walkthrough with this building I thought was really interesting. I was walking through with the administrator in this very innocuous little quiet room with the little white sofa. He goes, that's the quiet room. The quiet room? He goes, oh yeah, he goes, I caught a couple in there having sex on the couch the other day. That was more visual than an architect needed. So I was like, well, what did you do? He goes, close the door. So that apparently is the standard answer. But you'll see things like aviaries and things like that starting to come up. It's getting toward the Edenizing concept, but it's not quite there. You can't quite touch the animals and things like that. But this starts to give a whole different character to the space. This is an interesting idea because I like the feel of this. We talk about the homey residential feel of what you're trying to obtain. How do you maintain that? This is artwork that instead of having the maintenance of an aquarium, it actually has a 3D fish that you can touch. So if you think about it, there's other ways of creating some of those items that you might want to have maintenance-free. So this kind of option, all of a sudden it's a different kind of way of obtaining the same type of thing, a positive distraction. Areas where you have seating and things, this feels good. That feels like home to me. Does that feel like home to you guys? That's the kind of environments, and those are little details that make it feel that way. It's the styling, it's the little bit of molding, it's all these little teeny details, and those are the details that make it feel like home and not like an institution. The idea of putting certain things out and about so that people can touch them. It doesn't hurt them if they do, and they can go ahead and do that. So the environment, that way, I think is important. The scale of the environment, if you can cut the scale down to a reasonable size that feels more home-like, that's key. Joe's connection with the outdoors. I have a really good friend. She's gone now. But Miriam, she taught me so much. One day I went over to see Miriam. I said, Miriam, it's a beautiful day. You want to go outside? She goes, oh, Jane, I'd love to go outside. Okay. Well, Annie was sitting behind her in her wheelchair, and she goes, can I go outside too? I was like, yeah, let me find out. So I went and talked to the staff, and I said, can Annie go outside too? And she goes, you might as well take her. We sure don't have time. Can you imagine somebody telling you can't go outside? That's crap. I don't think that's the way it should be, and I don't think anyone wants it to be that way. I used to think that was an operational attitude problem. It's not. It's part of the design problem. If you don't put outdoor space where people can see it and monitor it, when you have limited staff budgets and limited amount of time that people can spend with the residents, then you're not accomplishing the job. So if you can't see your outdoor space from where your indoor space is to be monitored, then the designer's as much at fault as the person of the operator who's not trying to foster that same program. In this case, this is also in the South Bank of England, and it's actually in a complete circle. So no matter what room area you're in, this is an adult daycare facility. So no matter where you are, you see the garden in the outside. Visiting Mel. This is a challenge. This is one of 19 public housing senior facilities that we have in Baltimore City. We worked on 11 of these buildings in the last 2 years. And this is the existing condition, okay? Now, things you can do. These facilities looked exactly like this facility you just saw in the previous slide. Okay? And you know, Housing Authority, we don't have big budgets, right? So if you're working through that process, a lot of it is thinking out of the box about how to make your spaces feel good. And for example, this is simply a banner treatment to identify space, but all of a sudden it becomes the mail area that works with the newspapers and everything else that goes on with it. The idea of using different shapes in the floor to do some identification. Wayfinding. There's nothing worse than going on one floor and the next floor, they all look the same. You're like, okay, I'm on this floor. The biggest example I had of that is a woman actually did, I moved a piece of artwork in a hallway. She comes down, she's like, where are my whales? I'm like, your whales, ma'am? You know, she's like, well, that's how I knew that was my floor. When I got off on my elevator, there's the whales, I know I'm on the right floor. So if you think about that, it's the same with color, it's the same with pattern. You want it to be subtle, you want it to be, you know, so there's not any perception, problems with sight perception and depth perception. However, a lot of the different materials that can be utilized are as simple as what you choose and looking at what you choose and how things hold up and that type of thing. So we're looking at a housing authority project that probably gets some of the most severe abuse, and we're able to actually take a vinyl product, and that doesn't look like a vinyl product anymore, does it? So you start to get a feel for what it can be like, and at a reasonable cost and a reasonable budget. That's the dining room before, and that's the dining room after. Pretty simple things. Color issues, closing up things that are metal and cold and non-residential feeling, but also including it from a functional standpoint. We did something kind of clever on this project too. If you're looking for ways of getting new product, this is the before corridor, this is the after corridor. All of a sudden things are recessed like they should be. You kind of clean it up, basically. There's a place for everything. That's a big part of it. A lot of times you don't feel like there's a place for everything. I love this guy. He's just smiling and having a great time. And this woman has become near and dear in my heart because what she said when at the opening celebration, she goes, I thought I came to Epiphany House to die. And obviously, there's the space around her, I came here to live. If an environment can have that kind of impact and change somebody's attitude, that's a success. Visiting the nursing home. This doesn't look like a nursing home, does it? This is in the South Bank, also of England, and it was utilized as a Alzheimer's dementia that was broken down into pods, which most of you are familiar with. But the idea of the pods were a little bit unique because everyone had its own garden type. One had more of a Japanese garden style. One had the traditional English style. It was broken down into a scale of about 1 to 12. It was very manageable, had a small kitchen area in it that was all the small living room home model. And if you think about that in adult daycare, there's no reason why you can't create nodes that are like that actually creates a mini home. Just like mini me, well, this is mini home in that space. This facility, too, it was neat because when you came up to it and approached it, it was sort of like a unique experience because you're like, wow, this is like a neat building, and it's creative, and the inside of it was creative. The circulation was good in it. So I asked them, I said, don't you have a regulation that you have to have 36-inch clearance around the bed? No, we don't have that here. Oh. I said, well, the bed's kind of high. You've got Alzheimer's people in here. How do you keep them from rolling out of the bed? We put a chair next to the bed. All of a sudden, something that the simple, like you do with a kid, you put the chair next to the bed and it keeps the kid from rolling out. Simple solution. This was a nice solution for wheelchair storage. Keeping uncluttered. Just a little alcove, just rolls them right in there. This was their kitchenette area, and being that it was in England, a cup of tea in the afternoon was incredibly important. But it provided a social opportunity. A friend of mine, her mom is in an Alzheimer's facility up in New York City. I was there a couple weeks ago. And they have one area that they call the tea room area. And it's basically on the lower level. It has a small gas fireplace in it, and it has this wonderful buffet, and they just keep tea and stuff there all day long. And when people come to visit, she said it's the most wonderful thing because it's an activity to do. When someone has dementia, it's tough sometimes to just be sitting there. So if you have something that you can do, you take a little walk and you go get a cup of tea, and it has a process. It kind of brings back some of that from the childhood relationship. Continuing care retirement communities, seeking housing options because Joe's a very smart baby boomer. There's 2,500 independent living residents on Charlestown and on their campus. And you'll notice here, this is the architectural photo, and this is how people really live. When we come in and you see all the decorations for Christmas hanging from the $2,500 fixture and all that kind of stuff, we got to let it go. It's how they live, it's where they live. But the interesting thing is what design can do for people is, see this little chair here? It's about a $200 chair. I have residents that would order that for their own apartment because they could get in and out of it very easily. You know what else they like about it? See how it slopes down, that little angle? That gives them the push-off that they need. It's all done with Allen screws, so everything can be tightened down. They never wear out. The back of it has a place for their purse. They love that. They love to go to a dining area where they have a place for their pocketbook. So it's little teeny details, but that's one of the most successful chairs I've ever found. The idea that we did these banners like we saw on the other slide, the banner idea is a very inexpensive way of delineating space. You use it as a drapery type material as long as you can work with the sprinklers ahead of time when you're redoing a space. It is one of the least expensive ways to really create an environment. And what we found is afterward they called it the Banners Cafe. That means the design impacted it enough that they actually call it that. People like this scale, the generation's shifting. They don't necessarily like the larger dining rooms as much as the smaller scale, more casual dining room now as they would a few years ago. In their units, it's real hard to sell a studio now. It used to be studios were quite popular, so were efficiencies. So was the fact that you didn't need a dishwasher or a washer and dryer in your unit. Things are changing, those baby boomers want it, so that's where it's going. This is a continuing care retirement community that was in planning stages that's not proceeding right now, but what I really like about it is the fact it's designed like a small town. Where are we going in this industry? Universal design and a small town base. People are trying to get back to something that makes some sense. I mean, we are out there whirling around constantly, every day, and all of a sudden we want to be more rooted again. We want to bring it down to some scale. You came into the entrance of this and you actually had an area that was a town square. What was on the town square? All the amenities. So what if someone from the outside community can actually stop in? Because you notice we have a tendency of isolating people to a certain degree. The continuing care retirement community model is a great model, but if you think about it, it kind of isolates people. And our zoning has set up segregation in our own society because we're not to mix residential and retail. We're not to mix where we work and where we live. That's the old town, that's the little town model. And that's what people are starting to see now. They call it new urbanism is the term that you'll hear that they use for that concept. And this is the way it would start to feel almost like a college campus, but with the impact, like the small town. Like I went to Blacksburg to school, and when you went downtown, and the drill field and all that was kind of the center of it, but what it does is the community participates in the school. And how many times do you have a nursing home and the community participates in the nursing home? So if you could make that feeling or that adult daycare facility feel like it's a community center, then it starts to have a different kind of reaction, and you start to have a dialogue and a socialization that doesn't occur now. Seeking housing options, barrier-free. Universal design, does everyone know what universal design means? Handicap access is one way to describe it. Universal design is basically anybody can use a product, a space, a place without stigmatization, no matter how they're abled. So no matter what their abilities are, they're able to utilize the space. This one is a very interesting model. It's in Finland. It's called Marjala, and it has a multi-service link. And the multi-service link is basically in the community center, and in the community center is where everyone interacts back and forth, and you can download services from your TV or your home computer. no matter your age, no matter your ability, no matter what. And the facility was designed so that these little things here, they have a top on them so that if the kids can tell what kind of crossing it is by the color. A person who had visual impairment can tell from what's raised on the top of it, and then there's no curbing at all. So it's all designed with textures and materials that work together. So you have gardening, and it also talks about intergenerational. Instead of the isolation idea, it really talks about integrating more of that. Light switches should be lowered. Bathroom walls, toilet, and shower areas should be reinforced and blocked for installation of grab bars. Shower floors should be appropriately sloped for drainage. I still think the best way to do a floor or an area in a bathroom is to have it so that you either slope completely to drain and you use a chair. Basically, again, it's the transfer issue. It's the transfer part is where the fall occurs, not in the bathing process. Beautiful barrier-free, beautiful universal design, and design details for health are all three of Cynthia's books, and I recommend those books highly. Aging in place, one of our biggest challenges. If you have an adult daycare facility, the other challenge is what does that person do when they go home, because that becomes part of your problem too, I'm sure. So what do you do to look at that? Home modification, what can happen now? They actually have an elevator, a small elevator now that goes up and down, and you can utilize the floor space when it's in the opposite position. So there's products out there that can help people at home, which can then help you more too in your job because they now know what the resources are as well. I think family members have a really hard time. I mean, we're really going to be a big challenge because where most people want to be is in the aging in place side, is in their home. Empty nester housing. Basically, the typical of empty nester housing is the first floor bedroom for the master bedroom, the caregiver suite, adjustability, flexibility. Most people could stay in their homes if they planned a home when they were probably in like their 40s or 50s and that was where they wanted to retire and going to stay. All they would have to do is make sure their corridors were 36 inches wide, they put lever handles, and they had 36-inch doorways. And just that alone would allow them to be able to stay in their home that much longer. So in a sense, when you talk about advocacy, advocacy is educating people on what aging in place means. Because aging in place means different things to different people. It may mean for one group, it may mean living in my home. For another group, it may be downsizing to a condo but staying in my neighborhood. For another person, it might be moving to a continuing care retirement community and using that as your aging in place model. So it has different meanings for different people. And older people are great because they'll say, aging in place, what does that mean? Does that mean like I want to stay in my house? So once again, we're not even telling, we have terms we use that our market doesn't understand, so they don't know how to access services because they don't know what it's called. You know, most older people don't know what universal design means. So part of the outreach for us as a designer and architecture firm and a sort of an advocate is to try to do that, to try to educate, because education will help people be able to do that better and take advantage of that. So this part of it, we're going to talk about the Joe's results and recommendations. And what we did was we took the Joe presentation as a trial the first year in 1999 and 2000, 3 locations. We took it to Miami, to LA, and Chicago. And what we did was worked with different designers and architects to see what their input was. And what we found out was that we not only got people that were architects and designers, but operators were coming, administrators were coming. People were really trying to seek information. So the first go around, we took the data that we got back from the interactive portions and then created another section about things that people recommended. Some of the neatest ideas come out of brainstorm sessions in groups like yourselves. The second group was that we also got really good information from was we did an Orlando Joe, which was with the Symposium on Healthcare Design. We did an Alaska Joe with ASID, which is the American Society of Interior Design, and AIA, which is the architectural organization. And we did one up in Alaska, which is a really interesting place to do a presentation. And then we took it to the World Congress on Universal Design for Seoul, in Seoul, Korea, this past November. But the fact that we're now expanding out into other cultures and trying to get information back and using it as a vernacular base, for me, has been very exciting this past couple of years. So what we did was we asked participants that were in the group to review what changes in design, operations, products, and manufacturing would improve Joe's, Josephine, and Mel's lives. So what would happen if you could do anything you wanted to, no budgets barred or anything, what could you do? Some of the recommendations that came out of it, you may click with, some things might create some ideas for what you could also utilize. For those of difficulty in traveling, establishing a video library for virtual tours, sort of a self-guided tour in 3D. For example, Disney through virtual reality. So if someone couldn't go out, I had one resident at one presentation, she goes, you know what my ultimate ride would be? She goes, I'd like to go up in a hot air balloon. And if you couldn't experience that, if we could bring in that movie To Fly, bring that in and the residents could feel like what it was like to be in a hot air balloon, she goes, that would be it. I mean, and this lady was probably in her mid-70s. And I thought, oh, go girl. Downsizing from the home into a facility, we all know how difficult that is. One thing that I thought was a very good idea, when we were starting to downsize, you know how you have that favorite set of china? And almost every family, older person will have that. Have it displayed somewhere in the facility so that when they have their private dining experiences with their family, they get to use their own china pattern. And I think sometimes we forget that there's ways of taking furniture pieces that might be donated or whatever and really utilizing them in a way that kind of stimulates more comfort, more of a residential feel. Also, something else that came up was the promoting a mentor program within facilities. When a person first comes into a facility, you'll notice that a lot of times we try to put windows into activities so people are kind of attracted to it and that kind of thing. But it was recommended to have a buddy system. So you had a new person come in and you had another person that would then work with them to kind of get them acclimated and address it. It's kind of like you would in a college when you bring a new person into a college or a fraternity. Retail combined with a dining experience. I think this is a huge opportunity. You know, takeout taxi, the phenomenon of takeout taxi. Why don't we adapt takeout taxi to the Meals on Wheels program? What if a local restaurant was part of the Meals on Wheels program and you used takeout taxi, and once a month you did Chinese, and once a month you did pizza, and once a month you did whatever, and that company then supported that for your facility. So it would be like the takeout taxi. You know, it's like it would also provide a good outreach. It would be advertising for them, great publicity. It also, again, another way to bring community into your facility. This is one of my favorite group programs we do. We do an interactive with this too when we do a full day about a college student senior companion program. What would happen if you combined a student enterprise from local colleges for a senior program? So as a result, what came out of that is one group didn't come up with a program at all. They came up with a mobile van. And the van was where the programming happened. Basically, the students used the van, go get the resident, they would pick them up, and they would go to the museum. They would go, it was an outing, and they would do it on a weekly basis. And they designed this whole van concept so it was just like, it was like a mobile home kind of thing. But if you think about it, we usually think, oh, if a program, it's got to be in a space, a physical space. And that's not what they came back with. They came back with the fact it wasn't a space at all. It was a van. And the van was how we went back and forth. What do you think this space is? What this is it's a cafe area here. This is actually a photograph that's on the wall. It goes out through. This is a physical therapy unit. And what I want you to start thinking about is the idea that if you change how you do something, just like we talked about the girl with the art doing the occupational therapy, if you change how you look at things, how can you deliver the services differently? What they did here, it's called Independence Way. And Independence Way is the idea being that you go through the process and you become independent. Is a combination of spaces like this that is an actual operating cafe and spaces like this that are actually playground oriented. This is actually for children who are paraplegic. They slide down the slide into the balls. These are PVC grips that are made for rock climbers that were mounted on a laminate wall structure, and that's how they do their growth work. They go up, they drop, and they drop and fall into the balls. So these kids, all of a sudden, they have an opportunity that they go to the playground to get their occupational therapy. You know, usually kids go to PT one-on-one. You cannot get another kid to participate in the same room at the same time. It's scary, it's frightening, it hurts. All of a sudden, it's fun, it's energetic, and it talks to things that they like to do. They like to play. Same thing for adults. They used to have the nurses from the hospital used to stick the residents in a cab and send them over to PT. Now what they do is they like to go over because they like the atmosphere of it. They like the idea that it has a store, but it's not a real store, but everything has things on the shelves that have package weights in it. So you take a basket just like you would in a store and you go through and you put things down, and that's how you get the therapy done. So it's using real life actions that support what you want to do, but not in a clinical setting. This gives you a better idea of what this Independence Way looks like. It actually has a road that's a mock road that goes through it, and it has all these different stations of activity. This was the playground area that's also used. There's the red ball. This goes up and down. These go up and down for balance and balance support. It also makes up the log that goes over the creek. So you think about the difference of what a space could feel like. Snoozlin. It's a therapy that was developed by Dutch therapists for people with intellectual disabilities and dementia. It was first introduced into North America 7 years ago for treatment for Alzheimer's disease. And basically, it's sort of this type of therapy that allows stimulation without providing agitation. It's an environment created as a no-fail sensory environment, encourage clients with sensory impairments to basically explore without restriction. So it gives them something to focus on as well as being able to explore in an environment that they haven't explored before. I kind of think of it as the lava lamp approach. You know, they combine pleasant sounds, music, light displays, and aromas. And I kind of think of it as sort of the 1960s retro effect of, you know, what's going on with therapies. And here this is one that actually really does work. It works with children as well, with disabilities as well. I talked to a man from Transamerica who was working on a planning session in California. And I asked him about it. You know, how does it work? How's your snoozling remark? And he goes, oh, it's great. The staff love it. So apparently, and I can see that. I could have laid down up there and been, you know, perfectly content for quite a long time, I think. The medical boutique. Now, I think this is something that's needed. It's something eventually I'm hoping I can develop. But I think that it's a good idea. You know how REI and Hudson Trail Outfitters, how they have the walls you can climb on and all the stuff you can try out, and you try out the boots and the skis and all that kind of stuff? Why don't we have something like that for assistive devices? Why don't we have spaces that people can go in and try stuff out on different flooring types? Shouldn't Nike be talking to the floor manufacturers? Shouldn't we have like Grandma Jordan out there doing some work for us? You know, we got to have somebody out there who understands they're not working with what shoe types. It's not like they go from a hard surface to a soft surface and they take their shoes off or change their shoes. That doesn't happen. So it seems to me that if you had a combination of, you know, a place for your prescriptions, a library, a computer resource, and what if you combine that with Woolworth's luncheon counter? Because of socialization. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of like the fact that Rite Aid has a bathroom, and you can get a lot of different things in Rite Aid right now. Well, wouldn't it be nice if it had a lunch counter too? Now, what's wrong with this? Where do you sit in the wheelchair? In a chair. How do you access that? You know, it's just dumb. It's just dumb, you know. I had somebody ask me one day, why don't we have it so that you have consoles on either side so that the, you know, in cars where the arms lift up, why don't the arms lift up and that's where you store your stuff, you know? By the time we get there, it's not going to be a remote and a comb. It's going to be a cell phone, a little mini computer, you know, a little disc thing that pops up. Everything's going to be wireless. Think about the stuff we're going to be dragging around with us on our chairs. All kinds of stuff, you know? A place to carry stuff, a place to put things underneath your chair. The fact, too, that really bothers me, why don't they make wheelchairs so that the sidearm folds down and you make a transfer? Is that the simplest thing? Why isn't it happening? Medicare reimbursements, and no one's pressuring anybody. I talked to a gentleman 2 weeks ago in Atlanta, and he has MS, and I asked him about, we're working on a table right now. It's in prototype stage, so that the apron part of the table has a drawer in it that slides out, has a piece inside the drawer that you take out. You turn it over, and it's the size between the wheelchair arms. So you're not battling that, how high should the table be, how short should the table be, all that. It's all the same height. You just create a space for within where their environment is. But you have to watch the size because you don't want the size to be too large that you're impacting your socialization circle. So you want to be able to have something that comes to them. You know, that bib thing. I've watched older people try to get that soup from the table all the way over. I mean, you guys have watched that. That's ridiculous. They should have their food here. This is where they need their food to be. So we're working on a table to try to make that happen for people so that when it is close to them and it works for them. That's what's called universally designed product. That means somebody in a chair can sit next to the person who's in the wheelchair. No stigma. I love this. This came out of one of the things, and I share the drawing with you because I think it's the funniest thing. PMV, Personal Motorized Vehicle. I asked them to design the best wheelchair. What would be the best thing you could do in terms of a wheelchair? This thing had solar panels on it. It had heated seats. It had this little rocket. It looks like a Batmobile. I like the flag. I thought that was a nice touch. Tilt, turn, flip, and eject. You turn, flip, and it helps you get up, you know. It also has treads, so you don't have to worry about. They do make a wheelchair that can go upstairs. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Very, very expensive, like $25,000 little item. But I like their idea. It's like that all-terrain Tonka toy kind of thing, you know, just kind of goes up and kind of keeps going working. But that's the kind of creativity that's out there that's not getting to the manufacturers of the wheelchairs. And it takes a team of us to try to make those kinds of systemic changes. Do you ever notice how hard it is when you go up steps to see the difference of the tread and the riser? If you take a carpet piece and you wrap it over the nose edging, take another color carpet and contrast it to the rest of it, that will actually give you a stair and step that's wide enough. We tried a tile top for the tread. It didn't work because bifocals wouldn't read the line. So now what we found, if you made it wider, people could see it. We wouldn't have any more falls on our stairs anymore. They basically can do it with your carpet installer, and it just kind of fits up the stairs. Something else too is to get flush edges. If you have a lot of broken tile edges in your vestibules and that kind of stuff, that's because they didn't install a transition strip called the zinc alloy transition strip. It's a small angle. It gets grouted in when you do the ceramic piece, and it protects that edge. All designers and care providers should be equipped with yellow glasses. Do you know that that's what happens to the older eye when you get older? That it yellows? And so if you use yellow walls and yellow floors, guess what? It looks like one big old yellow space. A couple of, I guess it was a year ago, DuPont are the fiber people who make carpet fiber. They had this whole thing about color and glasses and things, and they produced these glasses. They didn't know that they were doing a huge favor for me, but they were. These glasses have different color lenses on them. If I'm doing a presentation, that's clear right there for me. If I'm doing a presentation and I'm trying to make someone understand that I don't think you should use yellow and this is why, if I have them look through this portion of the lens, it will show them what the older eye sees. So by doing that, you have a really good idea. If you take yellow acetate or yellow trace paper and put it over a combination of finishes, you will see what will drop out. The things that drop out, that depth stuff, that's the stuff that are going to look like holes. The stuff that pops up too high, that's going to look like it's something that comes up at you. The stuff that reads level, all kind of tonally and it works together, that's the scheme you want to go for. Now, being that DuPont, that really weren't into the business of giving these to every elder care provider, which is what I tried to get them to do, there's a group called Lighthouse International, and I'll pass this folder around. Lighthouse they also have a catalog of unique little things that are kind of gadgety, but the gadgets are neat because they really work for everything from organizing things, pill placement, how to take your pills, all that kind of stuff. They give you a whole bunch of glasses that show everything from what happens when you have glaucoma, what happens when you have macular degeneration, what happens if your eye is yellowing. You could use these to show anybody in a facility, or if you're trying to figure out if it's the right finish or not, what they see. In designing or restructuring a facility, architects and designers suggest keep the walking distance manageable. That's one of the key things that's probably the most important, is keeping that walking distance a manageable distance. And lots of bathrooms. I reviewed a plan the other day. They had an entire courtyard area with a new space in the middle, not a bathroom in any of the public space. I'm like, hello, you wonder why you have incontinence? Creating spaces that encourage children to visit, Edenizing. Does everyone know about Dr. Thomas's work? Edenizing stuff? Isn't that great stuff? I got to see him at a symposium. I just thought he was the most wonderful guy. He told me this wonderful story about his little son, Zachary. Zachary said one day, he goes, I got to go visit another nursing home. And he goes, oh, okay, Dad, I'll go with you. I can play with the other kids. He's like, well, no, Zach, there's no kids in this nursing home. Well, I'll play with the animals and the dogs and stuff. He goes, no. Well, plants and fish. He goes, no, there's nothing like that there. He goes, well, Dad, I thought we were going to a nursing home. That's the image you want. Anybody to feel that it's a community center that much and that strongly. What a wonderful opportunity. Joe's helpful hints and resources. Kind of like Heloise. What information would you need to provide to a design professional to result in a successful design? Any ideas? One of them would be getting the architect and designer to do a day in the life of a geriatric nursing assistant or a day in the life of a social worker. Because if I don't understand the operation, I can't design the right facility. And so all the operational components are so important. So it's not only talking to the social worker, but it's talking to the administrator, it's talking to the geriatric nursing assistant, it's talking to the dining services people, it's talking to everybody who makes up the environment of that resident. And they miss that. People miss that. I reviewed a facility in Albany, the bathing core, you had to go through the dining room to get to the bathing core. It took 40 minutes to change a catheter because the products were not where they needed to be. I said to him, I go, well, if that's the case, why don't you just kind of package them up? Oh, can't do that because of Medicare reimbursement. So if that's the kind of stuff, that's the kind of information that you need to make sure they know. And you can ask them and say, well, do you know what we do? If they can't answer what you do, they better want to know, because that's what's going to give you a good quality product. What does establishing a program mean? You guys think about program as activities, care, clinical. That's what a program means to you. To us, a program means that it's square footage, how much space you need, and what the requirements are that go into that space. For an accounting person, a program means how much money is it going to be spent and what's the budget. So all of a sudden you're finding that terms are very important because the terms are different for everybody. They have different meanings. So clarifying some of those terms and meanings is very important. What are some of your current functional issues in your facilities? Think about some of the things that are going on. I learned this from an administrator I was working with one day. She said to me, she goes, the architect got done with his spiel. She looks at me, she goes, what the hell did he just say? She didn't understand a word he said. It was all architecture talk. And I said, he said that your geriatric nursing assistant cannot do charts at that desk without getting up and going around the nurse's station and pulling them off another rack. That won't work. I go, I know it won't work. But the only reason I knew it wouldn't work is because I was listening to how she functions and operates. If you see somebody taking 20 steps when they could be taking 9 steps to do the same thing, that's a space planning problem. That's a functional problem. And often can be corrected with moving a door, or so simple things can be used to fix those things. What would you change within your facility if you could change anything you wanted to? Think about the biggest thing that you would want to change, and then think about how could you change it and in what way could you change it utilizing something outside of where you already are. Ask family members, I have this issue, how would you handle that? All of a sudden you might come up with some solutions for something to change something in your facility you never thought about before. How could you better utilize existing space within your facility? This ties into the space planning side. What industry outside your own can provide creative solutions to your issues? We call it going to the asphalt convention in my business. My partner and I were talking one day, and it's kind of like going to the asphalt convention. I looked at him, I go, what are you talking about? He goes, well, what that means is that we're designers, architects, and salespeople. He goes, and if we go to another industries to see what's going on in their trends in their world, we get answers in our world. I went to an environmental conference last year for one of my clients, and they asked, well, how do we do more outreach? And I raised my hand, I said, seems to me that you're talking to yourselves. We do it all the time. Designers do it, architects do it. We talk to ourselves, we don't talk to other people. And I said, if you follow the trends of what else is going on out there, and if you want people to really be aware of environmental issues, then I'd contact AARP. And they're like, why would we do that? I said, because the aging population at AARP is the biggest lobbying group you have in the country. So if you want environmental change, who do you go talk to? You talk to the biggest lobbying group in the country. But they're looking inside, they're not looking outside. So every time you can look outside of yourself and your own industry, the more input and the more information you'll get, the better, I think the more you will see in terms of solutions to some of your own issues. The International Interior Design Association has a website, and they have an education and research forum and recommendations for design professionals. So if you wanted to see what was going on in education and research, if you wanted to see what was happening from like flooring, for example, I think there's a couple of studies on that. There is different studies and stuff out there. Another one is the Coalition of Health Environments Research. They're going to start doing one on churn rates. We're looking at long-term care rooms of single occupancy versus double occupancy. That's the kind of research that's going on. And most of those things are happening from design professionals trying to better understand the industry, so that it's very hard because the medical profession says, if you can't show us a scientific study that proves that the environment will improve a patient's outcome, we don't buy it. So the designers, in order to be more proactive and professional and credible, have been trying very hard to get more and more research done so that it shows and can demonstrate that environments do improve quality of life. And Joe's favorite resource is the Geezer Brigade. Empowerment through humor. An old geezer has an alligator on the front of it. This is an interesting organization, I think, because it talks about socialization. It's a web-based organization of 55 plus. Sort of welcome to the Geezer Brigade, empowerment through humor. An organization for and by seniors with an attitude, important enough to receive mail every day. So basically they get an email that says, hey, how you doing, every day, and it's a matter of being able to socialize. We are not seniors, golden agers, third agers, we are geezers, which implies feistiness, spunk, sparkle in the eyes, aliveness, even eccentricity. This is my favorite thing. Survey question on the Geezer Brigade page, how will you celebrate the new millennium? Soak my teeth with vodka and suck on them. I just thought that was great. And John Cornell, who started the Geezer Brigade, he's a real-life Joe. He founded the Geezer Brigade, he retired at 65, retired from an international PR firm as a vice president. At 44, he was degreed in English speech and drama from Cornell, received an MA in counseling psychology. Since retirement, he's moved to Mexico, finished a novel, became fluent in Spanish, played piano in a good restaurant. He was formally trained. Designed an alternative therapy program to overcome his own health problems. Traveled to Europe with his son on stock market profits. Moved to Charleston, South Carolina for the weather and cultural opportunities. I mean, this guy has like got Joe written all over him. Although all organizations do not utilize humor as well as the geezers, the belief in the UN principles for older persons is still the same around the world. And those principles are independence, participation, care, self-fulfillment, and dignity, which is what we all deserve, we all want, and we all will have, as long as we look at our futures the same way. Our futures? Warning, warning, old people! This is outside of every facility in Great Britain, you know? And then I found a couple of them that are in the States. I was over by a Sunrise project, and it's like, warning, yield, old people! Is that the image? You know, I don't want that to be the image, you know? I mean, that's not Joe's image by any means. So we got to do something about that imagery. So not as long as Joe goes on the road and Josephine's with him, I think we have a chance of correcting that. Our desired future, as the UN quotes, aging is an individual lifelong development in context of longevity, which is a societal transformation similar to globalization and technological revolution. A lot of it has to do more with tonal gradations than actual colors. You'll notice that if you go into a certain facility now and you see mauve and kind of mint green, that you know it was done in the 80s. You know? So we try to look for things that are in the color trend, in the direction of the color trend. You really can't go wrong if you're trying to do something so it doesn't get dated quickly, is staying in the burgundies, the greens, the blues, the traditional basic colors. But you have to be very careful in terms of how you use them tonally. Because what happens perception-wise is if people have stripes on the floor or they have different things happening on the floor, they perceive that as a hole. They perceive it as water. They think it's wet. They try to step around it. They try to step over it. One guy was in one of these conferences, and he said to me, we have this room where my mother-in-law stays, and you walk in, and all the residents are up against the wall, and because there's this big dark carpet in the center, and so they think that there's a hole there, so they kind of stay back. If you saw the movie Awakening with Robin Williams, when the lady she would stop at a certain point, and they didn't know why, so he painted the tiles on the floor. Really, what she wanted to do was get to the window, but he thought she wanted food or something else that was in that space. But the reality was it stopped her because it became a barrier. It's usually a similar material. Like, for example, if you're doing, we'll use long-term care as an example. If you're doing long-term care rooms and therefore a cognitive frail group, you would do patterning and you would have different textures and things like that because it would add interest. It would make it a little bit more interesting instead of clinical white or whatever. So usually what we do is look toward maybe a violet color or a lighter blue or something like that and use the color, but use it continually. So it becomes one area. And again, you have to really look at the resident individually, and that's what's so difficult from a design perspective. Because you think about the individual and it's like, if I get to know them better, and you have to have the family involved because the family is the one that really knows what's going on with that person, then you'll find out if there are certain perceptions or where they stop and start. Consistent staffing also helps because they can start to cue you for some of those. How many of you have more demented population versus cognitive frail in your facilities? Which? Cognitive frail? More dementia. Okay. And I think that adult daycare, from my perspective, it would seem that would make sense because cognitive frail can be at home for a little while by themselves with some monitoring, but not necessarily they can be by themselves, whereas dementia they cannot be. So the dementia issue in terms of color, we know that reds and pinks are something to kind of stay somewhat away from because they evoke kind of an anger emotion and that type of thing. We find that certain materials are soothing to certain people and for others it's not. So you never know for sure. The very important thing is delineating between wall surfaces and floor surfaces. One facility was redone for the blind. I thought this was an interesting story. It used to have dark black cove molding around the edge, vinyl cove molding, rubber cove molding. And you would think, oh, that would be pretty ugly, to have that black molding, Well, after they redid the facility, the people kept bumping into the wall. apparently that dark line was something that they used as a reference point to delineate where the floor and the wall was. So as they were coming down the corridor, they would see that edge, and it was like, oh, well, there's that edge, and I know where I am, and they could clearly get themselves ambulate from one location to another. So in that instance, you want to be careful that your walls aren't blending into your floor. And if you have a wander path and you want to keep people going in a certain direction, you want to draw them through that, almost like a process. So you're like stepping them through the process. Have you ever been in an older hospital when they have like the red line on the floor? Follow the red line, you get where you're going. I love that. It's the simplest, most straightforward way of wayfinding you'll ever find in the world is follow the red line. Okay, but it's a couple things to it. One thing is what your lighting is, because indirect lighting provides warmth and it also provides you to be able to see. Did you ever walk down a corridor and you see those looks like wet spots? Those are reflections from the fixtures up above. And what happens there is that glare, and shiny is not necessarily clean. Does everybody know that? Shiny is a misperception that it's clinically clean because it's shiny. You know, it smells like Clorox, must be clean. You know, it's shiny, it's glary, it must be clean. That is a total misnomer. So what happens with you can use other materials that have a little bit of like pebble texture to them, or some of the linoleums that they are using again now. Some of them, they have like more of a dull surface. You know, you have to work with your maintenance people because they've got to understand why you're doing something, because God knows if you can't maintain it, it's not worth putting in. We don't usually do any kind of bordering. The only thing we will do is we may interrupt the corridor if you have a public space that you want to draw them to, because it's something that's, what is that? I want to go up and see what that is, because in order to get people to move, you really have to kind of give them focal points, and if they can't get the focal point, then they won't move through the space. So if you can have say a kitchen or a activity area interrupt your corridor, then you actually extend a different color finish that's in the same tone range, and you're like, oh, well, that's something different. Or you do something up above. The linear corridor of every continuing care retirement community, every skilled nursing, every assisted living, is that long, long corridor. And what we find is we call them dog houses. And they're like a little element that you try to introduce in the ceiling to break up what's happening. You change the type of light. So say you do a small archway on the ceiling piece, and then you provide along the wall some indirect lighting with just a simple fluorescent tube with a cover or wood trim. Very simple. And whatever kind of lean rail, chair rail that you're using. That all of a sudden, that little portal becomes a portal. So people are like, oh, it's like a doorway, so you want them to go through it. Versus if you have an emergency exit door you don't want someone to go through, you finish that out just like the wall, and they don't know it's there. So that keeps a dementia person from walking through the door, because they don't know it's a door. So if you want them, mark it. Let them know that this is where I want you to be, and strengthen that with using color and entry and lighting. Yeah, a lot of it is scale and flexibility. So if you can create smaller environments, what we did with some of them, and I don't like the big rolling doors and all that kind of stuff. They're very institutional looking. They remind me of there was a set. I went into a housing authority project up in Pennsylvania last week, and they had, I don't think these things have been opened. They were still that yellow mustard color that we all remember from grade school. They were all like packed up in there. I go, so do you use those? He goes, I'm afraid if we open them they would fall off, because no one has really used them. But the idea of division of space, a lot of it has to do with scale. So if your ceiling is like this, where it's all open, and if you can bring different areas and different things, different lighting levels, starts to identify space. The idea of the banners, things like that can delineate areas, so you can still use the open space when you need it to be open, but you can also delineate it into smaller activity areas. And I think too that dining, you'll find it the most, at least we do, is that agitation. You put them in a big dining room, and do you eat dinner with 125 people every night? No, So if you can pull things down to a scale level where you have 4 people at a table and you're breaking up space and breaking space down. And I found the bigger the space, the harder it is to do that. But if you start working with things like movable planters, you start working with things, aquariums even that are on wheels that have lockdowns that you can move things. So you can start to adjust the space. So if you're doing a certain activity and it's a reading activity and you're having a hard time because nobody can hear anybody, if you can start to close down a smaller area, the more edges you have to bounce off of, the better. So for example, if you have in here it's quite echoey. It's echoey because we have an arch and we have reverberation coming up and down. If we actually had a space where you could change the ceiling, or you had a wall coming out, or you could change the material surface, you would get more absorption and that type of thing. There are acoustical materials that you can apply to the walls, and they work to a certain degree, but you have to have them placed in different locations. So angles are not bad. You know, curves are not bad. Things that provide a sense of space. Knee walls are a good way to do it. Demountable partitions are a good way to do it. Areas that can kind of create space that allows for the acoustics to work better. And that's really what the bigger problem is in the hearing part of it, is the reverberation and the background noise, because it bothers them.